Hi, I'm Gordon Smith and welcome to the second and final element in the teacher pathway in this course on ADFM. After the last element, you are familiar with the learning cycle, which is the basic structure of most good teaching. The objective of this element is for you to learn key defining characteristics of good learning elements, how you can combine them together to form an educational activity, and determine if your activity has been successful. After finishing this element, you'll be ready to begin building educational activities using ADFM. During the last element, you learned the components of the learning cycle. We saw that a full learning cycle, including each of the 5 E's, can take place in as little as 5 minutes. Consider this question. What part of this course that you're currently taking is a learning cycle? Please select the best answer. While the individual learning elements of the course are combined into an introductory section in 2 different pathways, each section is comprised of individual learning elements, each of which is a single learning cycle comprised of the 5 E's. These elements combine together to form the course. This element will teach you how this process works. All teaching is structured. The most concise teaching takes the form of an isolated individual learning cycle comprised of the 5 E's. However, most of our teaching is more complex and requires incorporation of multiple learning cycles. Each discrete learning cycle can be viewed as a learning element, essentially a mini-course in and unto itself. Each learning element has a defined learning objective and the 5 E's. Learning elements are the building blocks that you as a teacher can use to construct your educational activity. The learning elements are combined in such a way to achieve the course's performance objective, much as building blocks are combined to form a particular structure. This concept should be familiar. For example, one can view chapters within a book as distinct learning elements, although each chapter may in fact be comprised of multiple learning elements. That this course is constructed of discrete learning elements is self-evident. Chemical elements are defined by a specific set of physical properties. Learning elements are defined by specific characteristics as well. Each must have a clearly stated and achievable learning objective that can be measured. Each is comprised of the 5 E's. If you would like to review the 5 E's, click on the text line to see their definitions. Learning elements must have an appropriate degree of cognitive load. As we learn in the learner branch of this course, students learn best when the cognitive load of the material is appropriate. It cannot be too simple or difficult. Finally, learning elements are defined by one of the 3 C's. Every learning element is characterized by one of the 3 C's: content, which maps the elements of the knowledge system; concept, which maps the relationship rules of the knowledge system; and context, which maps the relationship background context to the knowledge system. In the learner pathway, we consider the 3 C's in a different context. Here, we'll use a different example. Let's use carotid artery disease as an example. Here are 3 different performance objectives for potential learning elements. For each, select which C the element fulfills. The 3 C's describe the knowledge system that makes up a learning element as well as the overall knowledge structure. Here are the answers you selected. The objective was to learn vascular anatomy. This is a content element. It establishes the basic rules or architecture of the knowledge system. The second objective was to appropriately manage an acute stroke using thrombolytics. This objective establishes relationships within the knowledge system, large vessel disease and stroke, and management given the details of the clinical scenario. The final example describes a carotid dissection. The objective is to recognize the relationship between the acute left carotid syndrome and the background context of a recent accident and the presence of a left Horner syndrome. A key concept is that any individual learning element can rarely satisfy more than one of the 3 C's. It is almost always best to define just one of the 3 C's ahead of time. If you feel like you need to cover 2 of them, you'll probably be best off dividing your learning element into 2 learning elements. Now that we have fully defined the learning cycle and learning elements, which are the building blocks of a course, let's move on to how we can combine them together to create a more complex course. Educational activities can be simple, such as a 5-minute teachable moment, or complex, such as a multi-year curriculum. While different in scale, each shares in common a predefined structure. The 5-minute moment is a single element comprised of 5 E's. The curriculum is comprised of multiple layers of individual elements. Architectural plans serve as an apt illustration. The learning element is the fundamental building block of your course. Learning elements can be combined together in several different ways to achieve the performance objective, in the same way stone blocks can be used to build different structures with distinct purposes. The elemental architecture of an ADFM activity is called the learning trajectory. You can also think of the trajectory as a type of map. There are several common trajectories. In some courses, there is only way to get from start to finish. In others, there are many different pathways that may be chosen by the learner. The simplest trajectory is serial or linear. In this structure, each element leads directly to another. The learner has few choices about how to navigate the course. A serial trajectory is appropriate when all prior learning elements must have been reviewed in order to move to the next one. A parallel trajectory is more complex. The course is divided into stages. At each stage, there are 2 elements from which the learner can choose. They can view these in whichever order they prefer. Here are some other examples. There is really no limit to the types of trajectories you might construct. For instance, it is common to combine these. Tributary or stellate trajectories may have components that are navigated in a serial or parallel fashion, for example. What type of trajectory best describes this course? The best answer is tributary. There are essentially 3 serial components, the last 2 of which can be viewed in an order the learner prefers. This is a good example of how one can combine trajectories in order to achieve the desired performance objective. The overall architecture is tributary, and each branch is serial. So, how do you go about choosing your trajectory? Here are several helpful hints. The trajectory must align with the performance objective. The complexity of the trajectory may vary based on the sophistication of the learner. Learners value choice. When possible, give it to them. In designing a trajectory, it is important to keep in mind the teaching venue. What features do you think should be prioritized in online learning as opposed to large group didactic sessions? Learners value choice when possible. During a lecture, there is little opportunity for the learner to direct the navigation of the event, although careful use of audience response systems to do so permits some flexibility. On the other hand, online learning should prioritize learner choice. In this setting, the learner can navigate at their own speed and their own setting. Giving them maximal choice often enhances their satisfaction. Now that you've built your learning elements and combined them into a pathway, how will you know if it worked? You'll recall we started this pathway in the course by discussing performance objectives. A good performance objective is directly linked to a clear and measurable assessment. You'll also recall that the first and last E of the learning cycle are assessments, the exploration which assesses the learner's baseline knowledge, and the evaluation which assesses what they've learned. We'll finish this element by learning about different types of assessments and how they are used. There are 3 different types of assessments: formative, summative, and authentic. Click on each to learn more about it. A formative assessment gauges understanding along the way. It asks, "Are you with me?" This type of assessment is a dipstick assessment. A summative assessment measures acquisition of knowledge or competencies. Can you tell me what you've learned? A good example of a summative assessment is a written or multiple choice test. Real-world measurement demonstrating changed behavior by incorporating new knowledge or competency is authentic assessment. It asks, "Can you show me what you've learned?" A good example is a driving test. The student is demonstrating their driving competency in a real-world situation. Here are 3 photos about learning CPR. Select which displays a formative, summative, and authentic assessment. We have now covered the basics of how to teach using the Assessment Design Framework Model methodology. Let's review what we learned in this learning element. First, we learned that the learning elements are the building blocks of a course. Each learning element is a full learning cycle comprised of the 5 E's and addresses one of the 3 C's: content, context, or concept. Second, we learned that learning elements are combined to form a trajectory and that there are many different types of trajectories that can be used to achieve your performance objective. Lastly, we learned that there are several types of assessments: formative, summative, and authentic. If you have not yet taken the learner pathway of the course, you will have the opportunity to do so now. If you've already taken that, after completing the assessment following this element, there will be one final review element that will set up the final summative assessment for the course.